If you enjoy this video, please consider making a donation via PayPal to friendsofdusty@gmail.com. I'm doing a fundraising campaign to pay for my cat Dusty's medical bills, which came out to $2,618. Because the original incentive, saving Dusty's life, is no longer possible, I've decided to include incentives for my donors. The current amount remaining to be raised, as well as links to the video outlining the incentives and details of Dusty's medical needs, are listed below. Thank you in advance for any assistance you're able to provide. I've been blogging since 2007 and never asked for financial assistance before, nor am I planning to continue taking donations once this amount is received. Once I have reached the target goal, friendsofdusty@gmail.com will be disconnected from my PayPal account, and links to worthwhile animal charities will replace the information below. Thank you. Cassandra was one of the princesses of Troy in Greek mythology. She possessed the ability to foresee the future, but having angered Apollo, was cursed to never be believed. From this myth, the term Cassandra complex has evolved to refer to persons who make accurate predictions which go unheeded by society at large. In my novel, Eros Empire, I wrote prophetically of a world where authoritarian special interest groups were given free rein to ban anything they disapproved of. Little by little, but still at a faster rate than even I would have thought possible, my prophecy is becoming a reality. In the conclusion of the Galdines versus Individualism series, one vaguely disturbing statement among many was this.
Do you understand that? She walked into my movement and I said to her, what did you think? You were going to march into this movement, do what you want, and nobody was going to criticize you? I said, this is what movements do. Right? And I know we have the Norwegians here. They have the best way of organising a movement that I have ever seen, the way that you do. Because you wouldn't allow this shit to go down, okay? Am I right? Okay, yes.
So, what exactly is going on in Norway? Well, for one thing, the Norwegian branch of Gale's organization, Stop Foreign Culture, is especially active there. A simple visit to the SPC Facebook group page reveals photos of the Norwegian chapter proudly defacing property with SPC propaganda. If they were wearing brown military shirts with armbands and painting swastikas in the words Judenraus, it would be instantly obvious that this was the work of political extremists. But somehow that doesn't register with the masses if the people doing it are dressed like hippy-dippy college kids. We already know that Gale is a fan of the Nordic countries and authoritarian politics, given her championing of Iceland, but a recent report from Norway, apparently her favorite center of activism, may go a long way to shed light on the deeper reality of Gale's increasingly obvious fascist leanings. This report, titled How to Oppose Anti-Feminism and Right-Wing Extremism, Proposals and Recommendations from Experts in the Nordic Region, and linked below, outlines a proposed plan to condemn anti-feminist arguments as hate speech and therefore made illegal. Yes, that is correct. This political extremist group will finally have succeeded in making opposition to its goals and propaganda illegal in a number of countries in the Western world. Page 35 outlines the proposed measures in English. The first calls for all anti-feminist threats and harassment to be made illegal. The second measure classifies all anti-feminist speech as harassment. The third measure calls for annual surveys of anti-feminist sentiment. The fourth calls for the government to prioritize these matters in the interest of counterterrorism. The fifth allows feminist authority groups to control how masculinity is understood and practiced. The sixth makes overtures towards gender egalitarianism, but only on the premise that men who do not wish to adhere to these principles are doing so out of a desire to maintain their male privilege. 7 calls for anti-feminism to be addressed in the same manner as racism and gender equality. 8 demands that persons who work in the media be tasked with only portraying approved viewpoints. 9 and 10 address matters of cooperation between Nordic countries to accomplish these goals. Earlier I alluded to the brown shirts. These were the members of the Nazi Party known as the Sturmteilung, the party's original paramilitary wing. The brown shirts were responsible for the intimidation of opposing political groups, the aforementioned defacing of public and private property, and disrupting the rallies of opposing parties. If this does not seem like an apt comparison, consider the behavior of this now infamous group of protesters who interrupted anti-feminist lectures at the University of Toronto by pulling fire alarms. Or how about this group of protesters that attempted to stop the 2009 Miss London pageant?
Dozens of police officers struggle to keep control. A team of firemen battle their way to the scene. Angry crowds threaten to turn nasty. It's beauty pageant time.
We think it's part of a systematic culture of objectification and commercialisation of women's bodies.
One link in a human chain of female students who lock themselves together in front of a London club. Why? Well, it's hosting this year's Miss University London finals. 15 finalists from 15 unis showing off their brains and beauty. The organisers say it's a post-feminist event designed to educate and empower everyone involved. The human chain, on the other hand, thinks it's
misogynist, basically, that is pervading our society and making little kids feel like they have to dress up like models to be valued.
They felt so strongly, their night ended in arrest by London's finest. That's the police, not the pageant contestants. But no sooner had they been bundled into a police van and their door unlocked by the fire service, another team of angry people arrived. This one had banners and chants. And they had some news for the people queuing up to attend the beauty party.
They're not actually aware of what's being done to them, and I think if they actually looked around and looked at what pressure they're being put under, and all that's around them in the streets and everything that they're put under pressure to buy and be and look like, they would take a look at themselves and the relationships they have in their life, and they would realise that they are basically slaves and they're basically unhappy.
Over on the other side of the street, unhappiness sounded like this.
I just want to have fun, that's all.
Neither side looked willing to give any ground on this one, so as the pageant prepared to kick off, we left the guests doing their thing in the queue and the protest doing its thing on the pavement. Once inside, the contestants strutted, the crowds cheered, and the demonstrators continued to demonstrate.
A protester has dropped a stink bomb.
And then stormed the stage to distribute anti-beauty pageant reading material to the audience. But despite the anger, the literature and the smell, the show did go on, and London did get a new queen as Miss Kings was crowned. And outside the gates of her new court, the protesters carried on chanting.
We are here for education! Not for your ejaculation! We are here for education!
At every turn, we find ourselves dealing not with a feminism that is about rights for women, but about the imposition of authoritarian goals. Do you think that women will fare better under this new system simply because it was implemented in their name? What freedom do you have in a system where dissent is illegal? The report does not specify that these measures apply only to men, and as Comrade Dines has demonstrated time and again, women who dissent or fail to identify with this authoritarian point of view are held in particular disdain. This is not a vote for women's rights, but a vote for oppression, and I oppose it for the same reason that I oppose patriarchal rule, because authoritarianism is what it is regardless of the gender that supposedly receives preferential treatment. If these measures seem far-flung, as though the legislative experiment spearheaded in Europe couldn't occur here in the United States, consider that Comrade Dines was recently invited as an expert witness on behalf of the U.S. government in the case of Free Speech Coalition v. Eric Holder. I will be doing a play-by-play deconstruction of the lies Dines told under oath, but for now, let us consider the implications of this matter. Dines was asked to speak as an expert witness with regards to the recent challenging of 2257, the ordinance which requires that the producers of any media featuring sexual nudity or sexual interaction maintain specific documents which verify the age of the persons involved. If this seems unreasonable, stop and ask yourself if you and your partner have ever exchanged nude photos of each other or made a sex tape. If so, you can be prosecuted despite the fact that you're both of legal age. You see, the fact that you're both adults is irrelevant. You don't have the proper documentation. An example of how this law becomes problematic was demonstrated in the testimony of a photographer who wanted to publish fine art photographs she'd taken backstage on porn sets. The problem, however, is that many of these images, despite being blatantly and obviously of adults, cannot be published because they were taken in years prior to the 1996 passage of 2257, meaning no such records exist for them. The brutal irony of all of this is that Gail herself is in violation of 2257. As Julie Meadows pointed out, Gail is paid for presentations which display pornographic images. This makes her a secondary producer of such images and therefore requires her to maintain the appropriate documentation, which I would imagine she does not have. You should be more careful about which draconian policies you support, comrade. So what changed, Gail? Only a few short months ago, you were proclaiming that despite your championing of authoritarian measures in Iceland, you wanted us all to understand that you certainly wouldn't want to give the U.S. government more power, considering that it's heavily funded by corporate interests and couldn't be trusted in the same manner as Iceland. So why did you trot down to the courthouse to testify on the government's behalf? What's amazing is the way in which you conveniently disregard the fact that this completely dismantles your belief that the government will inevitably find in favor of the corporate porn interests. You're still out there on the lecture circuit proclaiming that the Ashcroft Supreme Court overturned legislation making it illegal to show sexual depictions of adult women who appear too young, thus instilling your ongoing message that the U.S. government is in the pockets of the pornographers and that you and your supporters are powerless in the face of this misogynistic power structure. Then you ignore the fact that every one of your ongoing victories, Measure B, Prop 35, 2257, demonstrates time and again that the U.S. government, in fact, does not side with the pornographers by default. Gail's victory lap ignores the fact that the judge ordered parts of her testimony stricken from the record, had to stop her repeatedly to ask her to stay on topic, and ultimately condemned her testimony for being inconsistent and internally contradictory. Nevertheless, it bears repeating that the U.S. government has, for the first time, turned to Gail Dines for guidance in its policy direction. Now, the cancer that has spread unchallenged across Europe has been invited home to the United States, supposedly the world's great bastion of freedom and personal liberty. In a recent radio interview, Gail revealed this additional stage of her ever-metastasizing presence.
Get back to what Marjorie said a little
Yeah,
while
what
ago.
do we do here?
What do you do here that has a chance? If Gail Dines was the czarina of the... No, I'm serious. So
or in the real
would you do?
world, what can you do?
Yeah,
Okay,
do
I'll
both.
tell you exactly. We just got a grant from the CDC to develop a public health approach to pornography. And what we're doing is we're building curriculum that's going into schools, doctors' offices, community activists, parents. That's what you do in America.
Education.
Yes, staying away. But from a public health perspective, right, you've got to broaden it. So you bring to the table all the stakeholders who have a compelling interest in the well-being of our next generation. And we get into very early on into schools, explaining to the kids about pornography. But you have to link that with what a healthy sexuality looks like. Because at the moment, pornography is a major form of sex ed in this country. You have to talk about intimacy, connection, equality, all of these things. So in the United States of America, I would go the public health route. I would stay away from legislation, given the crazy people that do often run this country.
Well, you know, I think I've...
Gail is now receiving your tax dollars to present her pseudoscience, the content of which is no more valid or substantial than creationism, as health advice for young people in public schools. Gail likes to criticize the porn industry as promoting an agenda that colonizes the minds of young people. Assuming that it's true, the pornographers still have the moral high ground. They attained the money which allows them to propagate their message through the free and open exchange of voluntary trade, the trade of money for labor and the trade of product for money. Gail, on the other hand, has appropriated your money for the purpose of teaching her ideology to your children without seeking the consent of you, the taxpayer, who has made it possible. The reason that Gail's ideas have taken hold in more socialized nations, such as in Europe, is simple. They have been taught to believe over many generations, first, that a system that allows for taxation to benefit garbage propaganda studies is just, and then to accept that the information is valid. With this sinister measure, the Stop Porn Culture Party begins its re-education process here in the United States. I once received a comment to one of my videos from a person claiming to be a student at Wheelock College. The person stated, proudly, that my efforts were only going to educate other adults, while Wheelock students were themselves going into careers in education and social service that would put them in control of, quote, your children, and that they would win in the long run for that reason. I dismissed the comment at the time, saying that it was the best argument for homeschooling I'd ever heard, and it is, but otherwise didn't give it any further thought. Now, in light of these ongoing developments, I realize that even seemingly idle threats such as these are rooted in a far more sinister reality.
It's great when you guys comment to specific people on the panel. This one's for you, Gail. It's from JordanOwen42, who says, it's not your job to decide what's best for other people's kids, Gail, and I should not have to surrender my liberties for the sake of your inability to parent your children. It's something that comes up again and again. Why should one person sacrifice their liberties to have...
First of all, let's not get over dramatic here about sacrificing liberties, for God's sake. We're talking about being able to watch porn if you really need it. If Jordan Owen needs to watch porn for whatever reason he needs, he's got his right to do that. What we're talking about here is a much bigger question, and the right-wing approach here is that it is parents' individual rights. That is an individual right-wing approach that most of your guests are taking. In a more progressive society, the argument is, what is the collective responsibility of people to argue that we have an interest in everybody else's children? I have children, and I would like other people to have an interest in my children just as I want to have in other people's. So what I'm going to answer to all of those people is, yes, It is very important that we do protect our children from a major predatory industry. And what nobody is talking about here is that we're talking about an industry that is targeting children, specifically targeting children, through their free porn sites, so that by the time they first meet pornography at the age of around 11, they are developing a taste for hardcore, brutal, misogynist images. This is the business model of the porn industry. So instead of talking about lesbian and gay issues, which are important, and lesbian and gay youth should absolutely have access to whatever they need in order to get education and to think about how constructing their identity, I completely agree with that. But let's talk about a predatory multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. What are you going to do to stop them force-feeding our kids misogynist imagery? That should be the
what's the problem?
I think this is a bigger thing in that first it covers all the devices, and secondly, it makes a statement that the pornography industry can no longer continue as usual.
So it's a political issue then?
I think, sorry?
It's a political issue rather than protecting
absolutely.
children. It's political.
I would like to see the pornography industry, the hardcore pornography industry, closed down. How do you close down an industry? You do it by death by 1,000 cuts. This is one death by 1,000 cuts. Do I think it's going to be the overall answer? No. But we've just in America had a very big win against the pornography industry, where they were trying to get rid of a law called 2257, which said that the pornographers should not have to keep age verification data because it actually was too burdensome on their free speech. The judge disagreed with them, and now we need 2257 to continue because the pornography industry wanted to open up its children. So let me say what's going on now, and it's been a very bad year for pornography with the UK, with the 2257 decision that came out last week, and also with Measure B in LA. I'm looking forward to death by 1,000 cuts that eventually will get rid of this industry that trades on misogyny, violence, racism, and brutality.
I mean, it's incredibly irresponsible to treat our access to information online as a means to your end to destroy this industry.
Increasingly, Gale seems bent on guiding this country back to the kind of rigid monarchy rule that our founders sought to escape. Many of my regular viewers have written in asking me to comment on the current UK porn ban. For the unaware, Prime Minister David Cameron's plan comes down like this, as outlined by Business Insider, quote, Internet service providers, ISPs, will by default block pornographic search terms and websites. All devices that use the connection will be included in the ban. Internet users who wish to view pornographic terms on their connection will have to actively opt out of the scheme by contacting their ISP. Extreme pornography, which specifically includes pornography that shows simulated rape, will be totally banned. The Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center, CEOP, is to draw up a blacklist of abhorrent search terms that will be blocked from search results. These terms will also be used in conjunction with a central database of images to catch those creating or sharing child pornography. This measure is not, as Gale would like us to think, simply an on-off switch designed to allow for a catch-all block to stop children from seeing pornography. This measure requires that users register their intentions to view pornography. If the interest were purely in protecting the children, then the option would be set to off by default and simply available for parents to activate. This does not single out users who wish to exercise their individual rights and individual liberties. Instead, it actually empowers the parents. But this has the opposite effect. It forces those who wish to view an uncensored internet, whether they wish to see pornography or not, to register with their ISPs who are acting on government mandate and therefore collecting this information for the government. I realize that this will sound hyperbolic and far-flung, but I encourage you to stop and consider something. In the years leading up to the Holocaust and the horrors of the final solution, the Jews were not told that they would be herded off and executed. They were simply told that they had to register as Jews with the government.
the seed in our homeland, boys. Let it grow where all can see. Feed it with our devotion, boys. Call it the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Save it from the storm, boys. Water down its roots with tea. And the sun will always shine on the old Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. March along with the fight for boys, we were born forever free. Let's go pay the piper, boys, beneath the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Pay the price they're asking, boys, always pay the tyrant's fee. Never give up the struggle, boys, fight for the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Stand for the rights of man, boys, stand against all tyranny. Hang the lance of freedom, boys, high on the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. It will grow as we grow, boys, it will be as strong as we. We must cling to our faith, boys, faith in the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty.
The United States was founded on the premise of personal liberty, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For this reason, our country is founded upon and, albeit sometimes poorly, governed by a set of documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and its amendments, which outline the nature of the relationship that the state shall have to its citizens. These documents are crucial because they establish a rule of law that is predicated on government intervention only occurring when the liberty of the citizens is compromised. To guarantee this liberty, the people allow the state to maintain the ability to use physical force. If you assault another person, the state has the right to use the force necessary to detain you, compel you to stand trial, and administer the punishment deemed appropriate. This is true of the state's response to any crime that you commit, and the purpose of the state having the ability to impose force in this manner is so that the citizens involved in the matter can resolve their dispute peacefully. The man who assaults another is made to stand trial so that 1. His guilt in the matter can be determined, and 2. The persons that he has wronged may have justice without having to inflict that justice themselves. Additionally, the state may impose said force on matters in which a breach of agreements constitutes an act of force or would necessitate an act of force to rectify, such as when one or more parties are in violation of a contractual agreement. This is the proper use of the government's ability to use force, and it is for this reason that it is crucial that all free persons understand that the government accomplishes all that it does for society, no matter how beneficial the results may be, through the use of physical force. If you do not pay your taxes, the government will eventually use force against you. If you do not send your children to school or demonstrate that you are educating them satisfactorily, the government will use force against you. There is no such thing as a government program which is not accomplished through the use of physical force, and for this reason, any time a person attempts to have their ideological beliefs made into law, they are attempting to force their beliefs on others. If stop porn culture and other antis accomplish their goals, they will succeed in making the government impose observation of, acceptance of, and adherence to their code of morality. For this reason, they are attempting to use force against you. No, they are not the ones showing up at your house to inspect your property, confiscating your belongings, and arresting you. Instead, they are like the sniveling pissant who, himself too small to be the school bully, surrounds himself with meat-headed thugs to do the physical element of bullying on his behalf. Just as in The Wizard of Oz, the prestige and influence that these charlatans command is hinged on your paying no attention to the man behind the curtain. In this case, they want you to pay no attention to the fact that they are too weak and pathetic to use force against you themselves, and want you to parade under the delusion that they are accomplishing their goals by non-violent means simply because their gigantic meat-headed buddy is the one doing the pummeling for them. If you accept their premises uncritically, you become their unwitting stoolie who considers snitching a civic duty. Saying that one opposes equal rights for women because they oppose this fascist legislation is like saying that one opposes religious freedom if they oppose Sharia law. This is no longer a matter that is in the abstract realm of implications and slippery slopes. These craven enemies of freedom have been emboldened by the acquiescence of limp-wristed political stooges to believe that they can impose their delusional beliefs on the world at large. To those persons who champion this report and its request, the passage of mandatory internet filters, and the implementation of illogical and unnecessary bureaucratic measures coupled with a re-education of the youth program, I offer you this simple caveat. Understand that I am not suggesting that anyone do violence to you directly, nor am I calling for retaliatory force of any kind. I am simply informing you, through the same Cassandra complex I mentioned earlier, of what will happen. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually this will happen. You will pass some piece of legislation that will finally be the straw that breaks the camel's back. You will finally push the human race too far. You will finally bloody our noses for the last time. And when that day comes, no amount of legislation will protect you from the rising tide of the oppressed. In the controversial treatise Might is Right, Arthur Desmond, writing as Ronyar Redbeard, laid out a philosophical system built around the principle that morality is solely based around the whims of those in power, and that morality only exists so long as there is a government in place to impose it. I do not agree with all of Desmond's views. Nevertheless, he does touch on certain base truths about existence, including some that are especially relevant here. Consider this passage from his poem, also called Might is Right. Might was right when Caesar bled upon the stones of Rome. Might was right when Joshua led his hordes over Danube's foam. And might was right when German troops poured down through Paris way. It's the gospel of the ancient world and the logic of today. Behind all kings and presidents, all government and law, are army corps and cannoneers to hold the world in awe. And sword-strong races own the earth and ride the conqueror's car. And liberty has never been won except by deeds of war. What are the lords of hoarded gold, high pontiffs, priests, and kings? What are they but bold masterminds best fitted for the fray, who comprehend and vanquish by the logic of today? Cain's knotted club is scepter still, the right of man is fraud. Christ's ethics are for creeping things, true manhood smiles at God. For might is right when empires sink in storms of steel and flame, and it is right when weakling breeds are hunted down like game. Then what's the use of dreaming dreams that each shall get his own, by forceless votes of meek-eyed thralls who blindly sweat and moan? No, a curse is on their cankered brains, their very bones decay. Go trace your fate in the iron game, is the logic of today. The strong must ever rule the weak is grim primordial law. On earth's broad racial threshing floor, the meek are beaten straw. Then ride to power o'er a foreman's neck, let nothing bar your way. If you are fit, you'll rule and reign, is the logic of today. You must prove your right by deeds of might, of splendor and renown. If need be, die on scaffold high in the morning's misty gray, for liberty or death is still the logic of today. Might was right when Gideon led the chosen tribes of old, and it was right when Titus burnt their temple roofed with gold. And might was right from Bunker's Hill to far Manila Bay. By land and flood it's writ in blood, the gospel of today. Put not your trust in princes, is a saying old and true. Put not your hope in governments, translateth it anew. And all books of law and golden rules are fashioned to betray the survival of the strongest is the gospel of today. Might was right when Carthage flames lit up the Punic foam, and when the naked steel of Gaul weighed down the spoil of Rome. And might was right when Richmond fell and at Thermopylae. It's the logic of the ancient world and the gospel of today. Where pendant suns in millions swing around the swirling earth, it's might, it's force that holds the brakes and steers through death and birth. Force governs all organic life, inspires all right and wrong. It's nature's plan to weed out man and test who are the strong. Setting aside the unfortunate racism in parts of the poem, we are able to get at the underlying truth of Desmond's argument, that liberty is a right of the strong, not the weak. Does this blunt social Darwinism scare you? It shouldn't. It is the morality that you chose to live by when you declared that you would impose your beliefs on the rest of us by force. And if you choose to deal with others by force, it is only proper that you be answered with force. It is then critical that you, the initiators of the use of force, evaluate carefully your position. You are not strong. You do not have the strength of body nor of number to conquer others and force them to live by your standards at the direct point of a gun. Instead, you take the coward's approach and appeal to the government to do your dirty work for you. And what is your government but a cowering mass of sniveling piss-ants fortified by their armies? When you ask such governments to implement and impose your agenda as law, you are asking for nothing more than the agenda to be imposed by physical force, because that is ultimately the only thing that gives the government its power. You sniveling hordes, look at yourselves. Look around you at the shapeless, amorphous globs and spindly, emaciated twerps that you call your comrades, and ask yourself if these pitiful weaklings can rally the brutal strength necessary to gain and hold control. Did you ever stop to ask yourselves why certain beauty standards were maintained throughout society? Did you think that those standards were put in place to inflict psychological torture on persons of lesser appeal? Did you honestly believe that your sociology teachers when they told you that beauty was an illusion and that men would find Andrea Dworkin and Natalie Portman equally as attractive if only the lies of the patriarchy were wiped out? Perhaps it is time to turn around and stare full-on into the mirror of truth and accept that these beauty standards are rooted in something deeper than passing fashion trends. Look with unrestrained inquiry at the possibility which you've sought to evade for so long now, the possibility that these standards are derived from the traits that our species has been hardwired to recognize as those that will best ensure survival. Then, and only then, can you confront the reality that those who recognize necessities of survival on a gut level are more likely to be guided by the fundamental truths of existence, the truths that you have struggled and scrambled to mask in the web of delusions that you call your theory. Your existence, be it as an intellectual community, a political activist group, or even a component of society, has been maintained in willful defiance of the brutal truths of existence, and as such is maintained by and at the willingness of those who embrace said truths, just as the existence of any parasite is maintained by the willingness of the host. And so, like any parasite that is aware of its host's suffering, you seek to delude your host into believing that it is the one at fault and that maintaining your continued existence is punishment for the sin of the host's ability to live without you. You are the parasite and freedom is the host. You have existed as long as you have because you have propagated your ideas in societies that have allowed you the freedom to do as you please, even conspire to subvert the principles that have made you free. But when you pose a legitimate threat to those principles, the realization of your parasitic status is inevitable. And with that realization, your host will further realize that the moral code by which you have controlled it is an immaterial abstraction held in place by the clumsy support structures of guilt and paranoia. Once a thing is seen, it cannot be unseen, and you will have to decide if you have the strength to impose your morality on a free society directly rather than getting the existing government to do it for you by proxy. I don't know if you will succeed or fail, but I do know that it won't be easy. There will be no trigger warnings, only triggers. There will be no safe spaces, only hiding spaces. There will be no patriarchy, only hierarchy. And the only gender justice will be that which is handed down by the winners. I do not long for such a battle. I love this life and the world in which I live, and for that reason I implore you to stop and consider your actions. You, the brown shirts, are not the ones responsible, not yet at least. But if the Nuremberg trials are any indication, there will come a point at which the horrors committed by your party will become so horrendous that all those involved will bear some responsibility. In his outstanding surrealist novel, Kafka on the Shore, Haruki Murakami uses the story of Adolf Eichmann's trial for and conviction of war crimes as a metaphor for the situation in which his protagonist is presently involved. To the unaware, Adolf Eichmann was the central architect in designing the method and procedure with which Hitler's final solution was carried out. At his trial in Tel Aviv, Eichmann employed the Nuremberg defense, saying that he had only done what he was ordered to do by Adolf Hitler and was not guilty in a legal sense for the death of any of the Holocaust victims. This is true. He did not kill a single person. He simply designed the system by which people were killed at the orders of the person whose agenda he ascribed to. This is true, but it negates the fact that Eichmann committed what is arguably the greatest of evils, suspending his moral judgment. And for the outcome of that suspension, millions died. In Kafka on the Shore, the titular character is responsible for the death of his father, and having read about Adolf Eichmann, imagines what his own trial will be like. He imagines trying to tell the prosecution that he has no memory of what happened and can't be held responsible, to which his imaginary prosecutor replies, "It doesn't matter whose dream it started out as. You have the same dream, so you're responsible for whatever happens in the dream. That dream crept inside you, right down the dark corridor of your soul." To those of you out there, you, the apparatchiks in this grandiose ideology of newfound Puritanism, you who are hearing my words and smirking in anticipation of insulting me with some dismissive ad hominem, stop and truly ask yourself if what you are about to say to me is verily coming from your heart and mind, or is rather just some permutation of something that was fed to you by your activist professors. And if you are willing to ask yourself that question, ask yourself then whose dream you are dreaming. Are you dreaming of doing what is best for all women? If so, how did you come to learn that this was what was best for all women? If you trace back along that dark corridor into your soul and find it to have been designed by the architects of the anti-pornography movement, then perhaps you can trace it back to the beginning and isolate the precise point at which your dreams were co-opted by these ideologues. Think about that moment long and hard. Gail Dines has said it was when she first read Radical Feminism and realized that she'd been looking for this her whole life, but didn't know she'd been looking for it. Contemplate now, while you still can, whether or not you had a similar moment when you joined the anti-pornography movement, because that was the moment that you stopped dreaming your dream and started dreaming the dream of another. Ask yourself what sort of person would want to dream a dream for which you could not awaken. Ask yourself now, while you can still choose to wake up, because a point will come in which you cannot awaken from this dream of your own power, and those that finally do shake you awake will do so only so that you can stand trial for the horrors you committed while sleepwalking. And guess who's a member of Stop Porn Culture?
I am Jack's complete lack of surprise.